This birth portion, which is actually next week's Torah portion, begins with God saying to Abram, who will become Abraham, "Go forth from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house to a land that I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will aggrandize your name." And I'm going to... and you shall be a blessing. God leads him to the land of Canaan and tells him, "To your seed I will give this land." Thus begins the story of the Jews as the descendants of Abraham, as God's chosen people. It seems strange to me that this is my birth portion because the story of Abraham and Sarah has always been one of the more difficult stories in the Torah for me to connect with or make sense of it. My parents gave me the name Sarah. In case you didn't know, Sam is actually short for Sarah. But I never liked the name, which is why I go by Sam, and I never connected with Sarah's story. When it came time for me to choose a Hebrew name, the obvious choice would have been Sarah because it's actually my name, but instead I chose Chava, the Hebrew name that's usually translated as Eve, a fiery, rebellious woman who I could relate to. So when I converted to Judaism a year and a half ago, I finished a year and a half ago. I began the process 3 years ago. I went through a long process of struggling with and ultimately working through my relationship with the aspects of the religion that I found most troubling or difficult. One of my biggest struggles was with the idea of Judaism as an ethnic or tribal religion and my place in it as a convert who did not come from the tribe. In light of modern ideas about multiculturalism and religious pluralism, the idea of a chosen people whose religion is determined by their ethnicity rather than by their choice felt anachronistic and problematic. I was ready to join a religion, which was a big step for me in itself, but not at all sure I wanted to join an ethnic tribe. One of the things I saw as both beautiful and horrible about Christianity, the religion I grew up in, is its claim of universalism. Christianity was the first religion to claim to be a religion for all people of the world, not just the members of one particular tribe or country. Everyone can be saved through Jesus. This is beautiful because it is so inclusive and welcoming, one of the first times in history that people moved beyond an ethnocentric focus on their own people and saw all of humanity as potential members of their tribe. At the same time, it is horrible because if you want everyone in the world to follow the same path as you, it can lead, and has led, to intolerance and oppression of those who choose not to do so, and telling everyone they're going to hell if you don't follow their path. This was horrible enough to drive me away from Christianity, and a lot of other things too, which Judaism, on the other hand, seemed to be both beautiful and horrible in exactly the opposite way. Judaism is a religion rooted in the history of one particular tribe, and for the most part, Jews see their path as the path of their tribe and have no interest in converting everyone else. At its best, this can lead to a beautiful sense of belonging to a path that is uniquely ours, and a beautiful tolerance of other people and their paths, letting others live in peace and follow their own paths. At its worst, this can lead to a sense of self-righteousness, that Jews are God's chosen people and therefore somehow better than everyone else, and a belief that it's okay to kill other people if they're in your land that God gave you, which is in this portion. Even though I knew it was a caricature, this aspect of Judaism was troubling to me, and as someone from outside of the tribe, it was the single biggest stumbling block to my conversion. It's the one thing that consistently made me think I might not go through with it. I've always recognized that these are not universal properties of Christianity and Judaism. There are, and have always been, members of both religions who embody the traits I have attributed to the other, and who have interpreted all these things in many different ways. I know plenty of Christians who don't think I'm going to hell, as well as Christians who are incredibly ethnocentric and not inclusive at all. And almost all the Jews I know now are extremely inclusive and not ethnocentric. Here at Beit Aleph, we teach that God chose the Jews for this path, and he chose all the other peoples of the world for other paths. and we even modify the prayers to bless all the peoples of the world, not just the children of Israel. But all of these examples felt like exceptions or adaptations, taking a religion in a different direction and not the fundamental core. As part of my conversion process, I studied Jewish history and participated in Jewish practice in a wide variety of denominations. Through this process, I came to understand the role of converts in Judaism and the surprising historical roots of Jewish tribalism, which completely unraveled this simplified story of Christianity as universal and Judaism as tribal. The first thing I learned is that conversion is a normal, natural, and ancient part of Judaism. When I first started this process, I feared that as a convert I would not be treated as a real Jew because I didn't grow up Jewish and was not ethnically part of the tribe. But this fear was never realized. Jews have always recognized converts as members of their tribe. King David was a direct descendant of Ruth, a convert. The Talmud is filled with clarifications about how each verse of Torah about the children of Israel also applies to converts. And every single interaction I've ever had with a Jewish person, whether secular, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, or ultra-Orthodox, has confirmed that converts are completely accepted and always have been as full, equal members of the tribe. The second thing I learned, which turned upside down all my ideas about Christianity as a universalist religion and Judaism as a tribal religion, is that the whole idea of Jewishness as a race rather than a religion came from Christians, not Jews. Before the Inquisition in Spain, both Jews and Christians considered people Jewish if they followed the laws of Judaism and Christian if they believed in Jesus, and nobody worried too much about your ethnic background. Jews were certainly persecuted in this era, and many others, but it was for their religious beliefs, not for their race. When Jews converted to Christianity, they were no longer considered Jews and gained access to all the opportunities that Christians had in Christian-controlled Spain, and many rose to positions of power. At some point during the Inquisition, people started getting concerned about all these Jews in places of power, and people started thinking that they were still Jews even after they converted to Christianity, and that it wasn't enough to convert them. You had to wipe them out or expel them. This was the beginning of the modern concept of race, and the beginning of the concept of being Jewish as an ethnicity rather than just a religious practice. Jews developed the concept of themselves as a distinct race in order to preserve themselves in the face of oppression by others who characterized them in this way. Which is not to say that the idea of a tribe is not important in Judaism. It is, and always has been. All humans are inherently tribal, and Jews are a tribe just as any people are. But what I learned from history is that tribalism is not uniquely or especially Jewish, and thus it is not something that should prevent me from being a Jew any more than it should prevent me from being a human. When I converted a year ago, I felt satisfied that I had worked through all my concerns about this issue. But then I started preparing for my bat mitzvah, and I hit this Torah portion. And I found myself questioning my place in the Jewish tribe all over again. Because on the surface, this story appears to be all about establishing the Jewish people as an ethnic tribe through a specific bloodline as the chosen people, so chosen that it's okay to kill anyone else who's already living in the land God chose for us. Now, here at Beit Aleph, we never shy away from facing difficult passages and trying to find ways to reinterpret them. We never take anything literally and always try to find the deeper mystical meaning behind every passage in the Torah. And in fact, Rabbi Olivier often talks about this passage as an inner journey, noting that the Hebrew phrase that begins this passage, Lech Lecha, which is usually translated as go forth, can also be translated as go out from yourself. So it would be easy to just interpret this as an inner journey. And this is all well and good, and maybe a good description of Abraham's initial journey. But as the portion continues, God appears to be taking great pains to clarify him that the idea of his descendants as a great nation is meant to be taken literally. When God says, "To your seed I will give this land," he does not seem to mean you will be the spiritual father of a community of people who follow the path of Torah. He means the literal offspring of Abraham and Sarah will live in this land. Throughout the portion, Abraham finds the literal promise that God has made to him implausible, especially as he becomes older, and he attempts to come up with other interpretations. And each time, God corrects him and says, no, that's not what I meant. What I really meant is that the direct descendants of you and Sarah will inherit this land. First, as Abraham and Sarah grow older and still do not have the children, the many, many children that God promised, Abraham complains to God that he will die childless and that his slave will become his heir. God says, no, that one shall not be your heir, rather one who comes from your own body. He shall be your heir. Then, when Abraham takes things into his own hands and decides to have a child with Hagar, and then begs God to accept Ishmael, God says, no, that's not what I meant. You shall be the father of a great nation through Sarah. So I was having trouble finding myself in this passage about establishing an ethnic bloodline. But at the same time, I knew that converts are typically associated with Abraham and Sarah. So when we're called to read from the Torah, we are called by our Hebrew name and then son or daughter of our parents' Hebrew names. But converts are called son or daughter of Abraham and Sarah, since their biological parents don't have Hebrew names. So when I was called to the Torah just now, I was called Chava bat Avraham v'Sarah, Chava, daughter of Abraham and Sarah. So why are converts called the daughters of Abraham and Sarah when these two people are most associated with being the biological parents of the Jewish tribe? This is particularly puzzling because the Jewish people as a whole are never referred to as the children of Abraham and Sarah, but as the children of Israel, Abraham and Sarah's grandson. It didn't take much research for Rabbi Google via conservative and Orthodox commentaries to answer my question. Converts are associated with Abraham and Sarah not because they are the children of Abraham and Sarah, but because Abraham and Sarah are themselves considered converts. Abraham and Sarah, unlike their descendants, were not born Jewish. God chose them, and they chose to follow Judaism, and their children were Jewish by birth. I was looking for myself in the wrong part of the story. I am not the daughter of Abraham and Sarah. I am Abraham and Sarah. I embarked on this journey not because my parents chose this path for me, but because God chose me. And the children of Abraham and Sarah are my children, Lucy and Sonia. So the other thing I struggled with in my conversion was the weight of choosing this path for my children, who are too young to choose for themselves. Several people told me not to worry about this because my children do have a choice, whether I like it or not. When they grow up, they will make their own choices about what religious path to follow, and I don't actually have any say over that. This is true. But I felt it was missing the point, and arguing against it helped me to articulate the heart of the matter for me. My children, like everyone else in modern liberal society, will have control over what religious path they choose as an adult. But like every other human on the planet, they don't have control over the religious path they grow up with. And this part, which they can't control, is actually more important for their identity. Because almost every person I've ever talked to, for almost every person I've ever met, the religious path that they grew up with has profoundly impacted their identity and everything about who they know themselves to be. And this is true regardless of what choices they made as adults about following or not following their path, whether they went deeper into that path, chose a completely different path, or became an atheist. Who the path they grew up in shaped their identity. So by raising my kids Jewish, I am choosing, in a way they cannot, something that will profoundly affect their experience of themselves and their world for the rest of their lives. I made that choice long before I decided to convert, when they were babies, and we started taking them to synagogue. And as a result of that choice, they have grown up with a wonderful, fulfilling, and meaningful spiritual path and a community that contributes to our lives and gives us an identity. This is what it means when God says he will bless the children of Abraham. And this brings me back to the reason I chose Judaism, or one of the reasons that Judaism chose me, because it is a religion of practice that takes place in the context of family and community, rather than off in a monastery or a cave. And when I look at it this way, of course I want to be part of the tribe. So there's still one lingering question for me, which is, what does it mean to be chosen by God, especially in the age of multiculturalism? Are we so arrogant to believe that we are so special that God chose us and only us? Why did God choose Abraham rather than some other guy or gal? Growing up Christian, I believed that God chose Abraham because he was really, really, really good. Abraham was somehow so spiritually and morally advanced that God selected him among all the people in the world as the most deserving of the status of the father of the chosen people. This same idea is present in Judaism, as I'll get to in a minute. But there's a problem with this idea, which is that there is no evidence for it whatsoever in the Torah. So when I saw that this portion starts with God promising Abraham to make him the father of a great nation, I immediately flipped back to the previous Torah portion to see what Abraham had done to deserve such an honor. Nothing there. So all it says about Abraham before this passage is, Terah begat Abraham, or Abram, as he was called then. Abram married Sarai. Sarai was barren. She had no child. And then Terah took Abraham and Lot and Sarai, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. And they came as far as Haran and settled there. Then Terah died. That's it. That's all we learn in the Torah about Abraham's early life. So then I flip forward to see if maybe he did something after this to retroactively deserve being chosen. So let's see. He repeatedly doubted God's promise. He made Sarah pretend to be his sister, which led to her being violated by Pharaoh. He had a son with his slave. He sent his first son and his mother to die in the desert, and then he tried to kill his second son with his own sword. So on the other hand, if you go into the Talmud, the rabbinic commentary on the Torah, there are many, many stories of Abraham's virtue that were inferred from the Torah. In one that is so famous that many people believe it is in the Torah, a young Abraham smashes his father's idols because he instinctively understands, even as a child, when no one around him does, that idol worship is wrong. But this isn't in the Torah. So if Abraham's virtue is so important, why was it not written explicitly into the Torah? The absence of this piece and the need for later writers to fill it in suggests something about God and about human nature. Humans seem to need a reason for Abraham to be chosen. God does not. What if there was no reason at all that Abraham was chosen? Eckhart Tolle, now a popular New Age teacher, had the recognition of God's presence suddenly hit him from nowhere in the midst of a suicidal depression with no effort towards God at all. Others have prayed, meditated, and sought communion with God their whole lives, never to actually reach him. We humans want to believe that if we are good, we will be chosen. History doesn't seem to work that way. Maybe the story of Abraham is illustrating a fact of life. Life is not fair. Some people are chosen, others are not. There is no reason. But Abraham's story didn't end with being chosen. It began with being chosen. God can choose us, but we must choose to respond. And Abraham does. When God tells him to go out from the land of his father, he could have said, "No way." But he goes, and he blazes a new path. When I told my friend that my birth portion was Lech, she had none of my qualms about this passage and responded, "Of course, that fits you. You're always blazing paths, new paths, and going forth and creating things in places that most people wouldn't go. You're always Lech Lechaim." So I'm not sure what it means to be chosen. Why was I lucky enough to be born in the land of opportunity with parents who taught me to take advantage of that opportunity rather than in an impoverished and war-torn community? Why was I chosen to follow this path and not some other? I don't know, but I know that what matters is how I respond to that opportunity. Like Abraham, I will stumble repeatedly in trying to follow the path that God chose for me and make mistakes. What matters is that each time I get up and continue to go forth.